Breaking the cycle to step forward. Authentic conversations from lived experience and a professional perspective in overcoming abuse with Chris Tuck and Beverly Ann.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Breaking the Cycle to Step Forward with myself, Chris Tuck, and the lovely Beverly Ann. We have a special guest with us today, Sarah Champion MP, and we're going to be asking Sarah all about her life, how she became an MP, and more importantly, all of her work around child sexual abuse and exploitation and the Victims Bill. So before we come to Sarah, I just want Bev to just introduce herself to Sarah, because Sarah knows me, but she doesn't know Beverly.
Well, hello, Sarah, and hello to anybody listening or watching us on this podcast. So I've been looking at some of your background as well. We do have some similarities, so be interested to see what goes forward.
Okay.
So,
come and join me on the green benches. There's always space.
So I'm actually known as a trauma recovery specialist. So I work with adults overcoming childhood trauma or stress, but particularly with the mind-body connection. So we're looking at chronic fatigue, chronic pain, fibromyalgia, etc. So I specialise in the emotional side, looking underneath at some of the causes of stress with the body. So I'm not a counsellor, so it's psychosomatic is my area. I am studying at the Open University for psychology, and I'm doing social sciences at the moment, and I absolutely love it. My background, my lived experience is growing up, I was the eldest of 6 children that my mum kept because she had another 2 adopted out. And I went into care from the age of 4. So I went to a couple of children's homes and fostered, and at 16, I lived in a hostel. That's when I knew back then that one day I would use my voice to raise awareness, but also we had all these adults around us who were making decisions in our best interest, but didn't actually ask us at any time. And sadly, I feel blessed that we were in care, absolutely, but we were often being sent home to a toxic family and also to my abusers, which included my father. So that's everything in a nutshell.
So the crossover there, Beverly, is that you obviously are doing a degree in psychology.
Yes.
And Sarah did exactly the same.
Exactly.
Yes, at Sheffield University.
That's right. Well, that's why I came up here. So I came up here when I was 19 and have basically stayed around ever since. I mean, my first job, sort of proper paid job, was actually for Rotherham Borough Council. So it's sort of come, and my last proper paid job was for running a children's hospice in Rotherham. So I've sort of come full circle.
Yeah.
So Sarah, how did you go from arts development officer to a CEO of a children's hospice? How did that happen?
I mean, well, to take a step back from that, I graduated in the early 90s, which feel very similar to where we are now. The only difference was then there was very high unemployment, whereas now there isn't, but very hard to make ends meet. It was my sort of first political experience was the poll tax, if people remember that. So rather than taxing the house, I think they were going to tax individuals or the other way around. And it was the first time I'd been involved in people really being adversely affected by their government policy decisions and rising up to challenge that, which we successfully did. And I got into the arts because it was my passion. It was what I loved. So I started, because I was unemployed after my degree, I started off actually working as a volunteer in an adults hospice in the funding department. Then I went from that to get some money in to running art workshops, and Rotherham Borough Council actually asked me to come in and do library workshops with children. And in Rotherham. And so I did that. Then they asked me if I could babysit literally the art centre, because at the time, and we didn't know it at the time, the art centre manager was actually pregnant, and it was a very complicated pregnancy. So she ended leaving work early and staying off longer. So that sort of got me formally into running arts organisations. And then I went to do the arts development, which was really very much about empowering the local community, giving them a voice, doing that through arts. So one really amazing thing was I was brought into the area, which is Ashfield, which is sort of like top of Nottingham, bottom of South Yorkshire, if you can imagine that band. And literally the year I started was when the last coal mine there stopped. So there was a lot of unemployment. There was a lot of identity being lost, community cohesion breaking down, all of the sort of the social structures that came with a big employer that sort of pretty much everyone went to just disappearing overnight. And I was brought in because the BNP was targeting that area. And in their wisdom, they thought that arts was the best way to counter fascism. And so what I did was just talk to the local people, find out what it was that they wanted. And one really good example was an old coal mine railway line that they sort of used, like a narrow 2 gauge that they used to get the coal out. And we decided to make that, rather than just sort of shutting it down and letting it grow over, we decided to make it into a sculpture trail. And everyone was like, Sarah, it's going to get vandalized, it's going to be destroyed. And because it was people's grandparents, it was their aunts, it was their brothers that we actually got to make the sculptures. Why would you do that when it was your next door neighbour that made it? And I realised we'd cracked it when I walked along it after we'd opened it the first weekend after, and I saw a sculpture that we hadn't made with artists, and someone had made that in their garden home and put it there. And I thought, wow, okay, we've got this. And then from there, I moved over to Manchester because I'm actually part Chinese. So my great grandmother was Chinese from Shanghai. And I went to run the Chinese Arts Centre because my grandpa, who was half Chinese, he died when I was 18 months, but was a very, very influential figure. Still is to a large extent. And so that helped me combine the arts and a part of my background that I didn't really know but wanted to engage with. And so I work with artists of Chinese descent, mainly sort of British Hong Kong artists, but from all over the world. And again, my role was to give them a voice, was to give them a platform, to let them be able to sort of express what was important to them. But it was a very, I don't mean this in a negative way. It was, I can't think of a more positive word than say it was a very rarefied thing. So I was working with a very small group of artists in a very specific context that was seen by probably a few thousand people. And I just thought, I'm giving so much to this. I want to give those skills and to be honest, the hours of my time to something I feel has a very direct, very real basis. So then I saw the Children's Hospice, Bluebell Children's Hospice job, being the chief exec of that coming out, and I thought, well, I'll never get it. But I applied anyway because I thought that's something that I can actually do on a daily basis. I can see the difference that I'm making. And I always thought I went through as the wild card, but the chair of the board said actually I was the one to beat the whole way through, and they gave me the job, and I ran it for 4.5 years, and it was amazing and phenomenal, and such a gift to me to be able to work there, because the families had I won't say they'd accepted, but they'd recognised and acknowledged the diagnosis of their child. And so the most important thing for them was to spend the best quality time that they possibly could with that child. And we were able to make that happen. But the group that I was most impacted by were the siblings, because the poorly child had the help, the medical help, the psychological help, the family's attention. You know, the family knew that they were going to be alive for, you know, hours, days, weeks, years. So they really wanted to invest in that child. The sibling is not intentionally, but is literally standing in the back of the room. And they're, I mean, how complex is it when you're young? You're going to lose your sibling. Yeah, you're jealous of them because they're getting all the attention and you're not, and you're trying to be a really good girl or boy and do everything you're told and be quiet, but actually you quite fancy running around and screaming and shouting and having a guinea pig or whatever. So I spent most of my time, we had a computer room, sitting there just chatting to the siblings and helping them as much as we could move forward once their brother or sister had died. And the one thing that I'm really, really proud of I don't know the stats there because I've not been there for a few years, but my sort of close friend has just taken over as chief exec, so I could update it. But men and women deal with the death of a child very, very differently. And the stat at the time was that 50% of relationships would break down when a child died. And I understand that. And for the 150 odd children that passed while I was there, all of the families stayed together because we were able to give them that support. So counselling support, but also practical support as well. And I feel really, really proud to have done that. So I went from one extreme to the other, and then became an MP.
What made you become an MP though, Sarah? We are really, really intrigued.
Well, I'm a very out feminist. I strongly believe in equality, and we don't have it in this country. We don't have it around the world. So I talk to sort of two women here, but I think anybody listening to this will understand as well. The reason I stood to be an MP was because another MP who was a woman suggested that I could do it. And I think that women and girls are particularly poor at sort of putting their hand up and going, yeah, I'll have a go. And it usually takes another woman or a girl to say, come on, you're good enough.
Yes.
So for me, she said that, and I genuinely thought she was mad. I mean, I genuinely, because when you put on the television, you know, and I come from a working class family, I know my accent doesn't reflect that. I went to a comprehensive school. I went to university. I was the first in my family, but that's when we had, you know, free education, and they got a full grant. And I've worked.
Wow, lucky you.
It's amazing. It's amazing. I mean, people don't even believe that was a thing once.
Yeah.
So I've worked for everything that I've got. But when I switched on the television, and still now when I switch on the television, I don't recognize many of those people that look back at me. So I just didn't even consider it. And you know what? I'm pretty good at it.
Well done.
The by-election locally. Literally my predecessor went to jail for embezzling public funds for 6 months. So pretty serious.
Wow.
And at the time, again, I thought that I was just, you know, a wild card that was sort of there to make up the numbers. But now I understand someone who had no political history, who wasn't on Twitter, who wasn't on Facebook, who was running the local children's hospice, was a really good, clean candidate. So I can see why the party, the Labour Party, sort of put me forward. And I think it's quite interesting because I don't have any political background at all. I actually had to learn the ropes. And I think that's been a real strength in getting change, because if you just do the same thing, you tend to get the same outcome. Whereas I've done things differently and I've got different outcomes, which I'm quite proud of.
And, you know, you said you're not a career politician. Because of your work in the community, you understand the community, you understand the struggles, and then you found different ways of working when you got into Parliament, perhaps different from the people that we do see that face us that are in Parliament. And I think maybe that is your success right there in a nutshell, is the fact that you've done all of that.
I also think, Chris, and I've got some phenomenal, you know, I'm talking about stereotypes. I'm not talking about the people that sit anywhere in the house, but our assumptions about people. And I would say a lot of it is because I've always had a job. So, you know, my job hasn't been politics, and I have always gone in to serve, and I'm really proud to serve. So I know who my boss is. It's the people of Rotherham, and I know that I'm there to do a job rather than to make a name for myself, or I don't know what other people go in for.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's move on a little bit now to the actual work that you have done around child sexual abuse and exploitation. Are you able to give us sort of like a timeline of what you've done? Obviously, we've looked at Wikipedia and all the rest of it, so we know what's out there. But is it true, Sarah?
I stopped looking at that many years ago, because otherwise you go, what? Why? And there's a typo, and it's just whatever. And there's also a distinction between Sarah Champion, the MP, and Sarah Champion, the person.
Yes.
And I try and maintain that. And I find when you go on things like Wiki, it starts to get a bit muddled in your own head.
Yeah. So we know we've read about you, but we're challenging it. We're challenging it. But what we do know, you've been involved in a lot of APPGs around CSA and CSE. So could you expand on that for us, all of that kind of work that you've done? Of course.
And so in my by-elections, this was November 2012, there was one of the very contentious issues that was used was that I think it was 2 Roma children didn't get placed with a family because the family was UKIP supporters. That's what was said at the time. And so then I was starting to hear, funnily enough, from the former BMP, I think she was a councillor, but she was definitely in the area, that children were being groomed and exploited. To be honest, because it was all very politicized, I didn't know quite what was going on. I won't say I took it with a pinch of salt, but I will say I thought, this all seems quite odd and I'm not really sure about this. And I've worked in the area for a very long time, and surely I would have come across this before. So my first day was at the very end of November, very beginning of December. And I think it was January the following year, there was a Home Affairs Select Committee. So this is one of the cross-party committees that scrutinises government decision-making, that was based on Rotherham Children's Services. And I thought, I'll go in and see what this is about, because it's my constituency. I'd met with the sort of the chief exec at the time of the council, and I've met some of the councillors, and they were there. And so I sort of chatted to them before, went into the session, and there was a woman there called Jane Senior. And Jane had been employed by the council to run something called Risky Business. I can't remember the time that it started, late 90s, I think, into sort of mid 2014, I can't remember what the date.
For a long time, anyway.
So she'd been there a long time. And she was talking about numbers of mainly girls, but not exclusively girls, who were being manipulated and then sexually exploited, trafficked around the country, and her frustrations about trying to get them the support that they needed from the council, from the police, from voluntary services. And I was just looking at this and I was like,
it's quite unbelievable when you hear things like that, isn't it?
What is going on?
What
is going on here? And I left that meeting. She says, so when she finished giving evidence, because I couldn't sit near her, but I caught her eye and I just went, sorry, mouthed it to her. And after that, she got in touch with me and said it was because I recognized what was going on and said sorry that she dared speak to me. And she started telling me a lot more. And she wasn't working for the council then. At that point, I got in touch with the charity Bernardo's, because for sort of 25 years they'd been working on what I then knew to call CSE. And we worked together to do an inquiry to see whether the justice system was fit for purpose when it came to prosecuting. So not so much the sort of the police end and not prevention, but sort of prosecuting cases of CSE. And by, I would say, the summer of 2014, if we were doing this now, I would be telling you that I was an absolute expert on child sexual exploitation. I knew it inside out and backwards. We'd published a report. We'd got some changes. So I'd managed to change. So the term grooming is a technical term, and that's meeting a child for sex. And I managed to change that, because in the law you had to groom a child twice. So I managed to change it down to once, because it's sort of like, so we give them a pass on the first time that they rape a child. Extraordinary. So I knew all about this. And then August 2014, a report that had been commissioned by Rotherham Council by then Alexis J, now Dame Alexis J, came out that knocked me for six, saying that they had identified, not that they thought, they had identified 1,400 young girls and boys who had been groomed and sexually assaulted in my town. And then from that point, I mean, there is no way on this earth I'm going to be one of those people that turned a blind eye. So that was it. I've been working in that ever since.
Can I just interject in here, because we've used a few acronyms.
Sorry.
So that's no, that's okay. It's just for our listeners. Just want to go back. So CSE is child sexual exploitation. And if we mention CSA, that's child sexual abuse. There was another acronym that you used, Chris, that I tried to get hold of quickly, but it was flowing so well. That was the AGGP, was it?
APPG,
APPG.
Parliamentary Party Group, or All Party Parliamentary Group. Which one is it, Sarah?
That one. All Party Parliamentary Group.
So it's cross-party.
A cross-party group of MPs that work together on a common aim.
Lovely, and thank you for that. So anyone listening, I raised the hand and I asked a silly question.
There's no silly questions. Sarah, before we go on to your current work and the Victims Bill and all of that, because we know we've only got you for a short time, what is the process of becoming an MP? What is the front bench? What is the back bench? And how do you get into the cabinet? Tell us what that's all about.
So I say this with pride, I'm a freak. I came in a by-election, and a by-election is usually when an MP either stands down, is removed, dies, and then so it's not a general election when all MPs have to step down and be re-elected or not. So a by-election tends to be quite quick. It tends to be quite issue-based. So at the time of recording this, Boris Johnson has stepped down in Uxbridge. So there will be a lot of investment, not cash, well, not necessarily cash, but time invested by the parties to try and win it. So politically, you know, everybody wants Boris Johnson's seat. So by-elections tend to throw up not your usual politicians who have sort of come up through the ranks. So maybe they studied politics, they work for an MP, then they become a local councillor, and then they stand to become sort of a member of parliament. So you tend to get more oddballs like me coming through. So when you start, a backbencher is literally that. So we have 2 banks of seating. You will have seen them during PMQs. The front bench, so the ones right at the front, is where our sort of the people that have been appointed by their party as the party's spokesperson and policymaker. So they sit on the front, and the rest of us sit behind on the back benches, so literally the back benches. An interesting fact, the chamber's really tiny. So when I'd never been to Parliament before my first day of work, and you have to go in and go through like a ceremony of enrolment, and they sort of took me into this like mini chamber. And I said, oh, that's really thoughtful that they've got like a mock-up so that you're not sort of threatened. So I said to the guards that were there, you know, this is great. So the real one, is it much bigger? And they're like, Sarah, this is the real one. It just looks big on telly. And I'm like, oh, okay, really embarrassed. But the distance between, you'll have seen like Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak shouting at each other on the dispatch boxes. So these are literally wooden boxes that would have had the papers in that would have been dispatched all over the place. The distance between the two of them is a couple of inches longer than 2 swords pointing at each other. So it's literally to stop us stabbing each other. That's the distance. So it's a weird place. So the cabinet will be your sort of top tier. So it's the people that you're most reliant on in the key roles. So under Jeremy Corbyn, I was the shadow Secretary of State. So the shadow is, we're literally shadowing those in government. So I was a shadow Secretary of State for Women Equalities, and I was in his shadow cabinet at that time. So once a week, we would all sit around the table and kind of decide the direction of travel for the party within Parliament.
So can I go back a little bit then? So at the time these by-elections came up, and you had somebody who said about going into government, you were working at that time. So what happens there? Were you able to work alongside? I mean, that must have been all change.
So by-elections tend to be very quick, and mine was exceptionally quick. So I had 3 weeks notice of when it was going to be. So I put my application in, I think on I can't remember, the Monday or the Tuesday. The interviews were the Monday the following week. Then you have the sort of the, so that gets you down to like a short list of people, and there was myself and another woman that were shortlisted. So then it's up to the local Labour Party members to make their decision between the candidates that they're offered by national, which one they want. So you do a hustings, which is where you go and basically it's like a sales pitch, and then at the end of that they vote, and then you become the candidate. So from that period, it was literally a couple of, I think it was 2.5 weeks from being the candidate to actually being the MP. So it's a crazy time. I mean, now we're looking at the election being probably in October 2024, and we've had some candidates that have already been in place for 6 months. Mine, it means that I took 2 weeks holiday from my job basically, and then my job very kindly let me go. Some people have more of a transition period than that once they get elected, but for those people that are candidates now, unless they have a very understanding boss and they live in the constituency, they're having to travel, they're having to negotiate time off work to come up to their constituency and basically let their constituents know who they are and what they stand for. So I mean, it's a tough process. That's one of the reasons why you tend to get the same sort of candidates, because they need financial support behind them to be able to do that. And unfortunately, I know a number of women who either single mums or in with partners, who that process, because it's taken them 18 months, financially has been devastating for them. I mean, it's really tough, and I literally didn't know what I was going into. And I also sort of believed all the myths that MPs are incredibly well paid, and that was quite a shock when I realised that I was on less money, much worse pension, and anybody could call me from a pig to a dog, and I just had to take it. So it was quite a challenging process.
One of our questions we've got for you, but we'll do that at the end, is how do you deal with criticism of your work when you're so passionate about what you do? But we'll park that to the end. Let's talk about the Victims Bill now, as well as Della's Law. How did you get involved in all of that, and what is it specifically that you are working on and maybe you need our help with, or our listeners' help with, because we have got a lot of victim survivors that do listen to our podcast?
Well, that's a great offer. Thank you. So legislation comes around very, very rarely, new legislation. So if you look at like the Sexual Offences Act, I can't, you'll probably know more than me. There was one in the 80s, there was one in early 2000. So the opportunity to change the law when it comes to victim support, you're looking once every 20-ish years. We had the Police and Crime Bill 2 years ago, where we managed to get, I managed to get some changes around positions of trust, which I'm very pleased of. And coming into the Victims Bill should be the vehicle to make sure the Victims Code, which defines the victim's rights, is basically becomes statute.
So Sarah, your ongoing work at the moment with the Victims Bill, can you share with us some information about what that looks like? How can victim survivors potentially help you with this? And anything else that we need to know?
Well, that's a very kind offer. Thank you. And yes, I do need help. Basically, it's me and about 6 other opposition MPs up against the government and their thousands and thousands of civil servants. It also comes around really quick. You can get a copy of the Victims Bill online if you go, well, probably if you just put it into Google Victims Bill, it will ping up, but on the government website, if you put it in. And it was meant to be this great piece of legislation. It was initially started by Claire Waxman, who is now the London Victims Commissioner, and was then taken up by the then new MP, Keir Starmer, as a 10-minute rule bill. And the government looked at it, thought, okay, this might be something. So then in 2015, agreed to take it on, but it's taken until now to actually see the document. The problem with it is it's a lot more slender than we would want. It puts the Victims Code into law, which is great. But as you'll know, the Victims Code isn't that expansive. So it's slender what your rights are. And currently, most people don't even know that there's a Victims Code, let alone what their rights are within it. So what I'm trying to do is broaden that by adding amendments to it and adding new clauses to it. So one of the things that I'm doing is I started working with Della and the Safeguarding Alliance. I can't remember, about 3 years ago now. So one of the things that we're trying to get in is to make sure that all registered sex offenders are unable to change their name, because they do that to avoid detection. With a new name, you can then get a new DBS check effectively. So it's terrifying, the consequences of that. And also in Della's case, if you were her abuser, literally on the day of court would change his name, and then all of the documents had to be reissued in the new name, with all of the wait time that takes. And people listening to this will know you build yourself up for that moment. So then for them to blow it apart, it is really quite horrific. But what I'm trying to do is broaden that, so that anybody, even before they've been charged, as basically a pre-charge bail condition, is unable to change their name. Because what I'm seeing is a lot of people keeping their birth name clean, using a different name, going through the court process in the new name, and then when they want to, going back to their original name, so that their identity is kept clean from the offences that they've carried out. I've also had cases of people getting new passports in the new name and literally leaving the country. And there's a number, I can't remember his name, there's quite a high profile case of a teacher who went and worked in Spain under his new name, his passport, and carried on abusing children. So this isn't a random thing. And in the information that I've got out of the government, we know that between 2015 and 2020, 16,000 registered sex offenders didn't give the correct information. Not all of that will be name change, some of that will be address, but you have to assume that a lot of that is name change. And also there's a number of sex offenders that have literally just gone missing. And I spoke to my district commander about this when I first became aware, and he was like, Sarah, how are we meant to find them if we don't know who they are? And I was like, yep, that's perfectly reasonable.
But that's the whole point, isn't it? To have a register of these people and not allowing them to change their name, so we can keep track of them.
Exactly
the fact that we put the onus on them to let the authorities know that they've changed their name is crazy.
It's a nonsense.
And
it's Sarah, nonsense. And it also means things like Sarah's law, Claire's law.
Exactly.
Utterly redundant.
Absolutely.
And speaking to any intelligent person in this world, when you explain this to them, they go, what? Why are we not changing that law?
Exactly.
So Sarah, why are we not changing that law? Why are people not going, yes, pass it through? Why is it sticking? What is it?
It's actually difficult to do. So you have to effectively, right, okay, let me start again. For pre-charge, I can see the human rights angle that, in this country, you're innocent till proven guilty. My view is you put other pre-charge bail conditions on, so this one will drop and we're sorry if a number of people get a restriction of changing their name because we think you've abused the child. You know, so I can deal with that one. The other argument is the human rights of the perpetrator. But I'm sorry, if you've been convicted and a judge says this is a condition of your conviction, it'll fall when you're off the sex offenders list. So so again, I don't have much truck with that. But the reality is it's actually quite difficult. So you could put a charge on and have an administrative log of everybody that changes their name. But then, for example, if you are fleeing an abuser yourself and want to disappear, you're suddenly in a public record with that new name. So there are risks around that. But to try and find a solution, I've actually been working with, and deliberately plugging here, Experian, and I think it's called LexisNexis. It's one of the sort of the credit dating things, and they already, for terrorists, for example, are able to work with the Home Office and track people's financial movements to find where they are. So they're pretty certain, and I've had lots of meetings with them, that they can implement something to that effect. So it's not too difficult. There's just not the political will to do it.
This is the thing that I will say is something close to home as well. And my father's dead, so I'm not saying anything that I'm not able to, although that also gets my goat, but that's a different thing. And it was only recently, my dad had his first name, his middle name, and his last name. And after I called the NSPCC as an adult to intervene on prevention for other members of the family, would just say, he did go on the register. It didn't actually go to court at that time, but I was interviewed, etc. And it only came to my knowledge literally within a month ago that he was using the surname as a double-barreled name. So he dropped his first name and he changed, and he was being identified as Cooper Thompson, and using it as a double-barreled. Yeah.
So you know firsthand that people do this, and
absolutely.
But by their nature, sex offenders, they are looking for weaknesses in the system. They are looking for
they're manipulators
all the time.
Sarah.
Exactly.
We all know that.
So it's inevitable. So other things that I'm trying to get in. So that's one that I'm going for. Other things are in terms of support that gets sort of recognised within the bill. They've only got IDVAs and ISVAs. Now, they're great. This is not to diminish from IDVAs and ISVAs at all. Fabulous, but they're very much tied to the court process. So what I'm trying to get is that definition expanded to any support service a victim needs. So that could be a stalking advocate. It could be a specialist service based on your culture, your religion, for example. So that's another thing that I'm trying to get in. And another one, and I would again be interested in your thoughts on this, is the children of paedophiles, whether that's online or not. Get them defined as victims, because if they're defined as victims, that then means they get to know, or their parents do it if they're young, the court process that's going on, parole decisions that are coming up. And if you think about it, if your dad usually is a paedophile, their details will be in the public domain. So you as a child, everybody in your school will know it's your dad. Every parent will be worried. Every parent will be worried that their child might have been a victim. Every mother will get blamed because somehow she's meant to know and prevent it. And normally what happens is the family either leave, they're financially compromised, but the psychological trauma on that child, I think, needs to be recognised. So one of the things, and Chris, maybe if you can help me with this, if people, that's what I'm going to be arguing for, because I think we have to recognise. So we're recognising children born of rape as victims under the definition. So why not children of paedophiles? And there isn't, for the state, there isn't like a particular financial onus on them. It's just getting them the information and access to support.
Yeah, and I agree with that, Sarah, because back in 1980, that's exactly what happened to me. I was in the playground. My dad had just been convicted of sexual offences. He was, a paedophile by that definition. And the first thing I knew about my dad being a paedophile was, your dad's a pedo. Yeah, they're laughing. And I'm like, I just felt the dirt and the shame and the guilt of being labelled my dad. And it was in the local paper, and we didn't have any interventions. We didn't have any support, any care. We just had to carry on with normal life, whatever that looked like. And I carried my dad's guilt for years. And went into therapy about all of it, because I felt dirty because of what he did, and it had nothing to do with me. So yeah, I do agree with you about that.
Absolutely.
Now, Beverly, did you give us the 5-minute warning? Did you?
I did. We've got 7 minutes and counting.
Okay, because Sarah's a busy lady and she has to go. So Sarah, how can we help you? So obviously we can add our voices to what you're trying to do, but is there anything specific that any individuals that are listening to this podcast can help you with?
Well, I mean, the first thing to say is, I don't even know what the date is. We're recording this on Friday, the 23rd of June.
Yeah.
Next Tuesday is when the bill process starts. And it will run for 4 weeks. All of the stuff, the majority of the stuff that I think listeners will be interested in, the victim stuff, is at the front. So depending when this comes out, I've put down a lot of amendments, and if people were contacting their own MP and saying could the MP put their name to my amendment, that shows the government there's a lot of people that are interested in it, so that really helps. So the other thing is, and Chris, I'm really sorry, I didn't know about your family history in relation to that. But if people, so I'm sorry.
That's all right. It's okay. I wasn't going to speak about it, because this is what happens. This conversation goes off where it goes off.
Okay. But if people do have examples, because what I find is it's easy to challenge data. It's not easy to challenge people's lived experiences.
Yeah.
So if people have an experience that I could put into my arguments, that would be very helpful. The later stages of the bill is around parole. And one of the things I want there is to make sure that victims are informed of all decisions that impact, but not only informed, that they have a right to, before a decision is made, have their voice heard. So that's a victim statement. That's also, explaining why, security measures around them are important. Because recently I've had 2 survivors of CSE who found out literally by accident through Facebook that their perpetrators were in open prisons with weekend release conditions. So they had no idea. And
for people listening to that don't understand this, the trauma impact of that is immense.
Well, can you imagine? I mean, I remember once this is years ago, I'd been on a date with someone. It didn't go well. I walked out of my physiotherapist, saw him sitting in the waiting room, and I went and hid in the toilet for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And that wasn't, that was a bad date. That wasn't being raped.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
It puts it into context.
Yeah.
We've got
thought of that.
We've got 3 minutes, and there's one last thing that we're trying to get everything in for everybody. Dare to Care, Sarah.
So Dare to Care was and is an absolute passion. It was me trying to prevent child abuse. And we all know how early child abuse can start. So for me, it was making sure from primary school age, all children knew about respecting themselves, respecting others, knew that they had the right to say no, knew that if someone said no, they had to back away. Because I don't accept that children turn 16, 18, and they're suddenly a predator. There has been a process that's gone on. So Dare to Care was working with survivors. It was working with the voluntary sector to make government bring in mandatory relationship education for all primary school. And in June 2017, yay, I got it in the law. The problem is the government still hasn't rolled it out fully. but where it is rolled out, it is having an impact. I just hope that empowers some children and prevents some future abusers coming, because we're all obsessed with once the crime's happened, but what if we could prevent the crime? And we can prevent the crime.
And that's something we've talked about, isn't it? About so sex education, about giving the awareness to children, because we assume, as you say, it's after it's happened, but there's also this thought. I know I've spoken to many different people that, you know, when we talk about child sexual exploitation, even abuse, oh, that doesn't happen here, or it doesn't happen around where we are. That's other countries, other places. Yeah, and
I
mean, they're delusional if they believe that.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of delusional people, though, Sarah, in this society, unfortunately, and within many institutions as well.
Yeah, but on that, and so I trained as a shrink, and it's always the last 5 minutes that you get the most interesting stuff. So I'm going to drop this and go, basically. Knowing the scale of child abuse, so 1 in 4, 1 in girls, 1 in 8 boys will have had some sort of adverse experience before the age of 18. That means that in every institution, there will be a sizable number of people that will have gone through. So we all just need to stand up, get rid of the stigma, and make the changes we need.
Absolutely. And that's a really great way to end this podcast, because sorry, I know I'm the timekeeper, but it is, we literally have 30 seconds.
It's been a pleasure to have you on today, Sarah. Thank you very much for your time. And we will obviously work with you going forward and keep up to date with everything. And if we can have you back on at some stage, we'd always welcome you.
I would love that.
Lovely. So thank you very much for your time, and we will catch up with you shortly. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
you. Bye,
everyone,
for now. Bye from me. Bye for Bev. And we will see you very soon.